I'm going to call the November 20th meeting of the White Bear Lake Conservation District to order. We have a quorum, it looks like, and we call to order. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Diane?
Under the treasurer's report, I would like to add December's estimated treasurer's report for 2018. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, I'll make a motion that we approve it.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the October 16th meeting minutes. Does anybody have any additions or deletions for the October meeting minutes?
Move we accept.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Public comments. Steve's on the agenda, so I'm going to assume there are none. We'll move on. New business. I don't have any new business. Unfinished business. I don't have any. Well, unfinished business. I would still like to have a meeting with the dock owners in Commercial Bay, and I will work to try to put that together again. My schedule's been a little off. And reports, action items. The executive committee didn't meet this last month, so it's on to Mike for the Lake Quality Committee report.
Okay, lake quality, the lake, as of yesterday, is 923.98 above sea level. And last year at this time, it was 1 foot lower. Last month, it was almost the same as what it is now. It was just a little bit higher, a couple inch or so. So it's excuse me, it's maintained quite well. The water temperature is 36 degrees, and it's cold, and parts of the lake are freezing. Main part of the lake is still open where it's deeper, but some of the bays and all, near shore and that, there's freezing, and a little ice skating has been reported, so there'll probably be more on Thanksgiving. I did request the Conservation District, Ramsey County Conservation District, I requested them to put in funds for us to help treat Phragmites, and that will come next year, and they're working on their budget when I called them, so there must be an annual budget, and requested as much as they could give to us. I couldn't give them a dollar amount, but I certainly twisted their arm that they were responsible to do something and let their conscience be their guide. So we'll see what happens, but I think we'll get something from them for that treatment. Next is Steve McComas's report. Of course, you've heard all summer long about the survey and the treatment and the chemicals, and whether you care or not, you're going to hear how it all turned out. And I think Steve makes it more interesting than most. So Steve McComas.
Thank you very much, Michael. And good evening, everybody. I have a handout here. I think rather than using the PowerPoint thing, we'll just go from the handout, kind of go old school. At any rate, this is primarily aquatic plant related. We do have some water quality data, and usually that comes in from Ramsey County. They collect samples at about 4 stations around the lake. But that doesn't come in until like March or April, so we don't have 2018 data yet, and so I'll not be showing that.
We did forward the 18-page report that you did submit in the last few days.
Okay.
To all the board members.
It
was only today. It was today that it happened, so they might not have had a chance to look
Here's
at it.
the maps from.
Oh, yeah.
At any rate, so kind of doing how it's going to work from this handout. It's about 10 slides. And although at first, some of these maps are a little bit small because it is a kind of a PowerPoint format, but I did on the last page here have a full-size map, and that's kind of what is the first map on page one. If we just kind of go right to here, to this map on page two, that's the full-size map. And what we do when we do this milfoil delineation, we go in a boat and we kind of do a zigzag pattern around the entire shoreline. Put rakes down, we use the sonar, and we're using some visual observation as well. And when we see milfoil, we'll take a sample and we'll make a point there. So on this map here, the black points indicate samples where there's no milfoil. The green circles indicate milfoil is present at a light growth, and yellow is a moderate growth. Red would be a heavy growth where it's matting. But we did this year a couple weeks earlier than we usually do. So we knew that if we had light to moderate growth, the odds were going to be good that in another month it would be a heavy growth. So with that, what we did then is we marked those, and then when we got back to the lab, we kind of circled them up. Hello, guys. Hello. Since you're here, I'm just talking about this. A couple of extras. We're talking about aquatic plants. Thank you. Anyway, so what we did, we got back and circled everything up. It's all kind of electronic. It's all GPS, ArcMap, things like that. We ended up with about 11 areas that we thought should be treated. And fortunately, in this first go-around, this first delineation, Mike was on the boat along with Jay Renville too. So we had some extra eyes, and it's always kind of good to get some extra input that way. So you can see what we did. We totaled, when we added everything up, we had about 69.9 acres, about 70 acres that we thought should be treated to prevent heavy nuisance growth, which would impact recreation and navigation. You can also see that there was a number of black dots that were sampled where there was no Eurasian milfoil. So that area, those areas were treated. And we came back then in August. Now I'm back to page one. Now I'm on this third map right here. And when we came back in August and sampled the areas that were treated and a few areas outside the treatment area just to see if there was any milfoil, and also by driving from point to point, we're also always doing visual observations. The milfoil that was present was very light, so we didn't see any heavy nuisance growth of Eurasian milfoil in August. So it looks like the overall treatment was pretty successful. What this third map shows is that it's mostly black dots. So we went to within those treatment areas and sampled in those treatment areas to see, one, was there any milfoil left, and also at the same time to see how effective were the herbicides that were being added. Because this year, we tried a couple different approaches with herbicide use. So, that other graph, that next map, where it's two maps, is just kind of the pre-treatment and then the post-treatment. But this table down here at the bottom of the page kind of summarizes what we found in terms of Eurasian milfoil before the treatment and then after the treatment. And for the most part, the Eurasian water milfoil, the EWM control, was excellent to, there was a couple areas that were good, a couple areas that were fair, and a couple areas that we called limited, meaning that the Eurasian milfoil was not completely gone from those areas, but it was at such a light growth, it was always 3 to 4 feet from the surface. So milfoil was still present, but not necessarily a problem. So in a couple areas, it completely knocked out all the Eurasian milfoil. And what we have here on the first column is the herbicide that was used in each of those treatment areas. It was triclopyr is a herbicide that is pretty selective for milfoil only. And so that's what we used. That was a dominant type. But the discussion was with Mike and then the herbicide applicator So let's try a couple of new things. So there was a new herbicide used called Depth Charge, which was a combination of two pretty strong herbicides, being that maybe we'll give it a double kick, you know, a 1-2 punch. Well, Depth Charge, and that you can see, we had very good control with that herbicide, but we also had pretty good control even with that, our standard Triclopyr, and even with the standard 2,4-D herbicide as well. For years, into the 90s and early 2000s, 2,4-D was used almost exclusively. And then in the last decade or so, there's been a little more use with this Triclopyr, a little bit more expensive, a little bit different formula than 2,4-D, but with the same type of action. And then Depth Charge is a combination of 2,4-D and another herbicide. It's kind of a cocktail mix. It's a pretty potent herbicide. I think the good news here is that we're getting good control with 2,4-D, or with Triclopyr, or with Depth Charge, those three herbicides. So in the future, depending on, so we'll get some input from the herbicide applicator because they got a lot of hands-on experience, but any one of those three could work, and then if they all work, we might as well go with the cheapest one on a per acre basis. So that's handy. The next table over here is just a summary of our native plants. So we're also looking for all other species of plants that were present when we're sampling within these treatment areas. And I think the good news is that the native plants were very rarely impacted. We had either the same percent occurrence or even an increase in native plants within those treatment sites. So that's good news too. So it looks like the herbicides that are being used are controlling milfoil and not really having a big impact or an adverse impact on the native plants. And going to the page on the back side of this, here's a graph. Can't hardly see the numbers on the acres treated, but you can see that for a number of years in the early 2000s, we were at a low level of herbicide use, being less than 20 acres. When the lake levels went down, more sunlight being able to penetrate in deeper areas where it hadn't gone before, it really did enhance a lot of milfoil growth. So that's where that big spike comes up, where we treated over 100 acres. And then after that, since the lake levels have been coming up, some of our herbicide use has been going down as well, because the milfoil is just not growing quite as thick or as dense as it was when we had last time we had 3 or 4 feet of water, less water depth. Now, this last year we had a little uptick maybe, but we were pretty aggressive this year. We were more aggressive this year in treating some of these areas than I think we have been in the past. So we were around 70 acres, and that's about the same, plus or minus a few acres for the last 3 years. One thing that we're doing, and it was based on, I think, input from the board last year. Somebody said, well, why? Let's take a look at, why don't you put the areas that have been treated, after the last 4 or 5 years together. Why don't you put them on top of each other and see what kind of a match you come up with. So that's what we did. And on the last, let's go right to the back, the last page back here. When we do that, what kind of stands out is that there are a number of areas in the lake that, almost year after year, are showing some milfoil growth. And you can see that there's been a number of areas that have been treated 4 or 5 years in a row. So what we have here has been from 2012 to 2018, I think that's 7 years. That's 7 years, and you can see that where we had overlapping treatments for 4 years or more, we kind of circled those up, saying those are probably the hot spots. And so you can see that when we did that, we added them all up. We had about 61 acres of hot spots. And that's a good kind of a good baseline, something to work with. But then what we want to do too is, for next year, for example, is to go and check those areas because they might be a little bit larger or they might be a little bit smaller. But this is a good baseline, something to work with. It kind of helps guide us. It kind of helps guide budgets and things like that as well. So last year, we had these circled up. We treated 69 acres, but there's been a few years, like 2014, we treated 33 acres. So it can fluctuate from year to year like that. But these hot spots indicate that those sediments, and there's conditions there where it's conducive to producing milfoil almost on an annual basis. And one other note that I think we should add regarding the herbicides. I mean, farmers have known this forever, that we can get good annual control, but it's very difficult to get long-term control with herbicides. And that's why farmers are treating every year with herbicides, and what we're finding is that there's some areas around the lake that we're probably going to, that milfoil comes back. So we're not getting long-term control with these herbicides. Sometimes we might get a couple of years, but if the sediments are conducive to growth, often milfoil will grow there, even on an annual basis, even when we knock it down. And another little side note is that these herbicides are supposed to be systemic, they're called, which means when the herbicide contacts the plant, it's supposed to travel down to the roots and actually kill the roots. And theoretically, it should get you a year or two of control. And a lot of these herbicides might do that, but there's enough milfoil in the lake that its neighbors and everything else kind of overwhelm that effect. And so we still have milfoil coming back in these areas where the sediments are just have the right conditions to produce that heavy growth. That's about the last graph, other than like Mike mentioned. We have kind of kept this graph going of water levels, lake water levels, going back to the 20s. And since since it bottomed out, lake levels have been coming up. Those have been having probably somewhat of an impact on our milfoil densities as well. Milfoil is still fairly abundant out in the lake, but its density, the density of milfoil growth can kind of change from year to year. And as the lake levels come up, milfoil will still be present, doesn't always hit the surface, doesn't always get, sometimes doesn't quite have the oomph to grow up and hit that, within a foot or so of the surface. So, the lake was down 4 feet, it only had to grow up, some areas 5 to 6 feet to hit the surface. And then we got 4 more feet of water on the lake, now it's 10 feet deep. It still might only grow up 4 or 5 feet, then it's 4 or 5 feet from the surface in some areas, not all areas. Native plants don't seem to work quite like that. They're not they don't grow with that type of an abundance. They're usually even keeled. They always grow, whether it's shallow or deep, they'll grow up usually 2 or 3 feet from the surface, and that's been pretty consistent too. So milfoil is kind of that's the invasive characteristics of Eurasian milfoil. So with that, any questions? Yeah.
Does every lake in Minnesota that has a milfoil problem, do they all just go with this control, or have some lakes actually tried to completely eradicate the plant?
That's a good question. We tried, when I say we, White Bear, we were kind of in the eradication mode when it first came in. We thought, let's really hammer it, let's be extra aggressive. Can we just wipe it out? When we've done that in a number of lakes around the state. When milfoil first came in the 80s, 1987 came into Lake Minnetonka. So some of these first infestations, it was really being hammered aggressively, never eradicated it. So what happens is that we found out with time that it doesn't take over every lake. I mean, some lakes, there's a number of lakes where there's milfoil present, but it's like growth. It's acting just like a native, natural plant. But when the sediments are conducive, has the right conditions, and we think it's probably nitrogen in the sediments, boom, it really takes off. And what's kind of interesting is that they've tried to eradicate and really get long-term control in Lake Minnetonka. That's been tough. And one of the reasons is that because nitrogen seems to be the driver for milfoil, up until about the 1960s, there's probably half a dozen bays in Lake Minnetonka that they had wastewater treatment discharge going right into those bays. And even though that was stopped in the 60s, those bays were just loaded up with nitrogen in the sediments. And those are the bays today that are still producing that really heavy growth of milfoil. And not every bay, though, has that. And there's a number of bays in White Bear I mean, in like Minnetonka, that don't have nearly the nuisance conditions. So we've tried to eradicate, try to get long-term control, but it hasn't been very successful. And it's probably because unless the sediment chemistry changes, the milfoil will still be produced.
Thank you.
Sure.
Questions? Mike?
Have they ever tried to change the nitrogen level, or has there ever been anybody who's tried to change the?
There has been, yes, they have, you know, they've added alum, that sometimes they've tried to aerate the sediments, and there's been a number of things, you know, cap the sediments, but it's either been too expensive or too harsh of a treatment, or it just hasn't worked. And farmers for a long time too have been looking at ways to either conserve nitrogen or work with it. We have not found a good way to control or reduce the nitrogen availability. And what happens is some of this nitrogen in the sediments is natural. So it has not always been coming in from runoff. For example, it's Cottage Park. That used to be going, there's been parts of the lake that have been weedy for decades, and probably longer than that. And Cottage Park is one of those areas. And the sediments there are a little bit different compared to the sediments in other parts of the lake. It's a little bit more peaty. Well, peaty is basically vegetation, and they're just natural levels of nitrogen in that peat. And so that's a natural system, and so Cottage Park is going to have milfoil probably on a long, ongoing basis because of the natural situation, natural setting with nitrogen. But farm fields and ag over the years have generated runoff that has filled up some of or certainly introduced some nitrogen as well. One of the advantages of White Bear Lake is that it has a relatively small watershed. And we haven't had a lot of farming ongoing. So one, that's why not only nitrogen is fairly low, but also phosphorus. So we can maintain pretty good water clarity on a long-term basis. Even before Zebra Mountains, we had pretty good clarity. Really the envy of the whole metro area.
Mike? Oh.
Go ahead. You want me? Yeah, I was just wondering about what is the potential or what the chemical, adverse chemical properties of these treatments? Are there any, or do they linger in the water, or what's their lifetime? And
Sure, that's a good question too. Herbicides have been registered and approved by EPA. So any herbicide that's being used has gone through a real rigorous process, basically a risk analysis. And you can quantify that, and the risk associated with any of these herbicides, 2,4-D and triclopyr, and even the other one, depth charge, have passed all those tests and those requirements that are needed. So the risk is considered to be low enough that it's approved. However, there's still some uncertainty with all of these applications and with any chemical. So the uncertainty is still there, and that can't really quantify uncertainty. So there's always that lingering back thought, and for a lot of folks, it's the uncertainty that is what's is the big kind of flag. But whereas the risk is considered to be acceptable by EPA and others.
now, do we have any treatment schedule? I probably should know this, but as far as when we treat and then how long, or do we post the area or
Right.
anything like that?
Yes, that's all taken care of by with the permit process, and also the applicator's responsibility is to post that. And most of these restrictions are relatively minor, except for like 2,4-D. They don't want you to water your yard necessarily with the water if it's just been treated. 2,4-D impacts dicotyledon type plants, which are the broadleaf plants and flowers and things. So if you were to use the water from White Bear right after a 2,4-D treatment, for example, and put it up in the lawn, it can kill some flowers and some broadleaf plants, but not necessarily your grass. So there are some restrictions like that for swimming and contact. It's very, very, very safe.
I have a couple questions. Just to dovetail on that question, but wouldn't it be the case that, we treat these isolated areas And so immediately after we treat, that pollutant, or let's say that chemical is going to start being diluted. Because we're treating a very small portion of the overall lake, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, sorry, do you know the concentration of 2,4-D in the depth charge?
Yes, it's the same, it's similar to the regular 2,4-D, it's about 2 parts per million.
2?
And then the other one there, that flax mizon, it's a newer herbicide. I don't even know how to pronounce it exactly. But it's, they also have, there's all these label requirements. And by law, they have to follow the label exactly. And so the concentrations are well set, and you guys follow them very carefully.
And then, do you have ideas of how we can improve the fair and the limited areas? Like, and really, let me just broaden that question. Do you have ideas now of how we could improve, or what we should consider for improving the treatment next year?
For make it more efficient, well, I think what we want to do is always have some objectives in mind. This last year, we treated with the main objective is to probably keep the sailing course open as much as possible. So with that, we want to have a clearance about 3 or 4 feet below the surface. So if that is kind of our objective, then we knew how to work around that. We knew where the sailing courses were, the main lanes, and we checked those places extra carefully, and was a little bit more aggressive than usual. But I would think that we look at these hot spots, and for even for not sailing, but just for motor traffic and everything else, we would like to keep plants within a foot or 2 of the surface for to clear the props and have some clear sailing, so to speak. So this would be the place to start. And there aren't many other lakes in the whole area doing this, whereas for a lot of lakes, this kind of random. You go every year without kind of knowing where you want to go or what you want to do. But we have a kind of a nice guideline now. So I think this helps us zero in and be more efficient. But I still think that in terms of long-term management, we're doing good. We're doing long-term management, just that it's an annual treatment. We just don't have the tools yet for good long-term control. But if we had those, farmers would have them first, and we would borrow from that.
Sure. And then just to switch gears here a little bit, do you know about chlorides in White Bear Lake, and if historic chloride concentrations, if the concentrations are increasing? Do you know about that for White Bear Lake?
Well, the last bit I saw was up to about 2016 when we were tracking it. And fortunately, it's one of the parameters that is being monitored by Ramsey County. What happened is that since they've been tracking chlorides, and we're one of the few lakes where we have going back 20, 30 years, chlorides have been increasing in White Bear. However, they've been increasing in just about every lake in the metro area. The chloride levels that we started with in White Bear were extremely low. And so although they've been increasing, they're increasing slowly, and they're increasing at a very low rate and a low concentration. So we have an increasing trend of chlorides, but they're low levels. So from that standpoint, we're in pretty good shape. One of the things that we have in our favor is that because we don't have streams, a lot of big streams coming in that could carry in chlorides, and also our watershed is pretty small. We're not going to have a lot of chlorides coming in from the outside. I mean, most of the chlorides are from road salt and from that type of maintenance project or projects. So we're in pretty good shape that way. There's a lot more awareness coming out with chloride and chloride use. So I would look at, we should keep tracking that. We have done in the past, we've done some trend analysis, just kind of looking at how things vary from over the years. Now the zebra mussels in the lake and the chloride issue being a little bigger deal, might not be a bad idea to go back and update some of those graphs for chlorides, clarity, nutrients, and things like that. Something to think about.
Do you know of anywhere where they're actively working to reduce the chloride use in the watershed, and if they're being successful and strategies they're using?
There are a number of watershed districts that have taken that up, but on a bio, and fact, there's even a few lakes, a small number of lakes, I think less than a half dozen, that are somewhat impaired right now because of chlorides. So if you get high enough chloride levels, it starts affecting some of the biology. But most of our organisms are very tolerant of salt. You have to get almost to brackish water for it to have any impact. So Ramsey, well, even Rice Creek Watershed District, Ramsey, Washington, Comfort Lake, Forest Lake, they certainly have awareness programs, and for salt use, to reduce the use of salt conservation, try to use the minimal amount. But basically, it's not so much homeowners in this case. It's really cities and counties that are applying the salt. I mean, they're applying 1 million pounds per mile sometimes. So it's really working with the big hitters to make sure that they're using the bare minimum amount. But at the same time, there's some hesitancy there because it's for public safety too. They're concerned that if we reduce the salt use too much, there could be more risk, more accidents, things like that. So it's a balancing act that we're still kind of figuring out as we go. But you'll see a lot of things in the paper with regarding salt and chlorides. But almost all of it is coming from road and de-icing operations.
Okay, any other questions? Mike?
Excuse me, anything new on the zebra mussel front?
Well, we don't have any silver bullets yet, so we don't have any whole lake controls. We are finding that, like in Lake Minnetonka, maybe you've seen it here, Lake Minnetonka, 97% of the zebra mussels in Lake Minnetonka are on aquatic plants. So they can be spread then from lake to lake with almost any aquatic plant that comes out of the lake on a trailer. So that's why those inspection systems are still good. That's a relatively new finding, that higher percentage of zebra mussels is on our aquatic plants. Makes some sense though, because they need to attach to hard surfaces. And really, White Bear Lake, Lake Minnetonka, most lakes around here, there's sand and a little bit of gravel, a few rocks, and they certainly will use those rocks, but that's a small percentage of the overall 2,500 acres in White Bear. So what happens is that the zebra mussels are using plants as a substrate, and they're doing pretty well on those in a lot of cases. There has been some research at the University of Minnesota thinking about trying to, in the middle of the summer, using low doses of copper to kill the villagers, which are the juveniles. Once they put out their gametes and they fertilize in the water column, they're going to be in the water column for a couple weeks before they settle out. And when they're waterborne like that, kind of drifting to the lake, a low level of copper might inactivate them and kill them. And they're thinking, we're not going to eradicate them, but maybe we can reduce the densities. But that's still under investigation because there's going to be some side effects too. Because copper is a lot of things are sensitive to low levels of copper on the lake. So, but that's kind of one research area. Otherwise, in terms of long-term management, we're still working on it. And we still, even take that step back, even for these new infestations, we're not being very effective at controlling new infestations and eradicating them. So if they get into a lake, they're pretty much there. We are learning what happens is that, one that we did find too is that in several bays in Minnetonka and other lakes as well, once the chlorophyll levels, the algae levels get down low enough, it starts limiting their growth, and they start starving and dying. So in Gray's Bay and a few other bays, we're now seeing dead zebra mussels and numbers going way down. Now what will happen, that probably will happen in White Bear too, is clarity increases, primarily because the algae is being filtered out. And once we get down to real low levels of algae, the zebra mussel population is going to be limited, and we'll get some dieback. So this zebra mussels will die back. Then what happens is there won't be as much filtering going on. We'll get algae starting to increase, and then the zebra mussels will kind of come and then follow the algae. The algae will crash. Zebra mussels will crash. We'll get some of these kind of long-term cycles like that, probably. But right now, we start out, deer mussels are way up here, and then they crash, and when they come back, they're gonna be at a lower level. Kind of chasing that algae.
Mike?
They don't eat all kinds of algae, though, do they?
That's right.
And what are we left with? Are we left with algae that we want?
No, that's a good point. What we are finding then, to take that a step further, is that because they filter out single-celled algae, they can't filter out these long filaments, these strings, or the colonial balls of algae. And those typically are blue-green algae. So they're filtering out the green algae and the really good algae, leaving behind the blue-green. And so what we'll end up with a lot of our algae communities might be dominated by blue-green algae. And blue-greens are not very, desirable. They have some toxic capabilities. Once in a while, a strain within a population can produce some toxic compounds, and then that's not so good. However, overall, because we've had historically such low phosphorus, and we've had low algae, even if the blue-greens are going to dominate, they'll still be at low levels. So it'll be good for health reasons, but some of the ecology in the lake will start having some impact. We'll see some changes in the lake.
Mike?
Thank you.
Okay, enough about milfoil and zebra mussels, but we have to kind of maybe, we mentioned this, extend the survey to start looking for some starry stonewort. Can you tell
I think
everybody
that-
what that is, what it does, and how you
Sure.
treat it?
Starry stonewort is a relatively new, non-native species of plant. It's a plant species, but it's a macroalgae. By that, what we mean by that is, if you're familiar with this cara or muskgrass that's in the lake, it's like a bed. It's a macroalgae, meaning that you can see it. It's big, but it's like cara. Cara is a macroalgae too. It forms beds on top of the lake bottom. It's not rooted. And what starry stonewort can do under the right conditions is that it just starts growing up higher and higher and higher, increasing. You have 3, 4, 5 feet thick beds. And if you're in water depths that are 3 or 4 or 5 feet, man, almost the entire water volume then is filled up with the starry stonewort. So they can do that in some cases, not in every case. But in Lake Coronas, I've been working on Lake Coronas for the last couple of years. They have 250 acres, and they're getting some of these big growths where all of a sudden you're snorkeling or diving, and you get into these beds, and then you're diving in 4 feet of water, but you have that much open water. So that's not too desirable, especially even for fish. I mean, even fish aren't going to go through that. So it has those potential impacts. I think the good news is that there's also a number of lakes in the state where when they found it early, and it's usually right to public access, they've been treating it fairly aggressively. You can treat it with copper sulfate. Because it's an algae, copper sulfate is a good algicide and good control. And so a Rice Lake, Pleasant Lake, and Sylvia Lake, actually I'm working on all 3 of those. We found it at the public access, been treating it 2 or 3 times a season with copper sulfate, and we've been able to contain it right there at the public access, usually less than an acre. So Mike is right. I think it's something to keep an eye on. And as we're out doing surveys, spend a little extra time at the public access. That's usually where it comes in. And if it's found, we probably want to be fairly aggressive in to contain it. You don't even need barriers or anything else. Well, here's what they do. It's kind of neat. Because it grows on the bottom, what they found is these herbicide applicators, they chill, they get their copper sulfate, it's liquid, they're shooting it off from a boat, but their tank, they cool it down. So they cool the water and cool the copper sulfate solution, and then they use these drop lines. So they put the cold water, the cold copper sulfate, right down near the bottom because it's cold, it's denser than the warmer water, so it hangs right down there in the bottom and it gets very good contact. So they got a nice little tool there, I think, for helping manage it. So that's one thing to look for.
Any other questions? Mike?
Isn't copper sulfite what they use for the itch?
Yes, it is. Yep. Copper sulfate is used for a swimmer's itch because it's that you're killing that little planktonic larvae that
So help with the itch.
yeah. The larval form, and that will also kill villagers too. So they'll kill a lot of things. But something they're very tolerant. I mean, it's not aquatic plants and fish and humans, we're very tolerant of copper in the system. A few of the other things, not so much.
Mike, any further questions?
Well, I could ask them all night, but no.
Anybody else have any additional questions for Steve?
That was awesome.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Steve, for your help that you give us. Okay, anything else from you, Mike?
Nope.
All right. We'll move on to the Lake Utilization Committee report. Mark?
We've got a pretty strong packet, and we're not going to get through them all this week, but we've got a long time before the snow thaws. So the first one on was Tally's Dockside, and the packet came in. There's no measurements on the diagram to how far the dock goes out, how far it is from the neighboring docks, or any of that. The other thing is we don't have any approval from the city because right now all the commercial marina have to have approval from the city that they meet all their requirements for ordinances, city ordinances. And on top of that, it was pointed out to us that he's asking for 65 boats, but commercial operators have to have a license from the DNR if they're going to have a business renting boats on lakes. And the DNR only gave them 42. And apparently, I apologize, this has been going on for a little bit of time, and I'm going to have to call the DNR and check on that and see exactly what it is, and we're going to have to make a new system, I think, for Commercial Bay that they have to include their DNR permit with their applications, and I think that'll solve the problem. So tallies and tabling is incomplete. The next one is Snyder Bay Beach Club. That's 2347 Joy Avenue, White Bear Lake. It's renewal identical to last year. We didn't receive any complaints that I'm aware of, and I move to approve.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion?
I'll just note that this is my beach club, so I will abstain.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That passes.
Next one is,
One abstention. Sorry, Mark.
yep, Alicia Heights. And that, again, same as last year, no complaints, and I move to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Passes.
Next one is Scott Bonin, and that one came in without a page 3 of the application, so we're going to table that because it's incomplete. The next one is Forest Heights. That's again in Matamidi. Same as last year. Yeah, and I move to approve.
Second?
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Passes.
Next one, big giant packet, all the Birchwood Village docks. The city turned in their packets this year. We went through them pretty well at the meeting beforehand, and renewal identical to last year, and I move to approve.
Second?
So motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Next one, Wildwood Beach Manor, that's also Matamidi. It's the condos by the park. Yeah, it's incomplete, so we didn't know if it was a renewal from last year. And then their drawings, they've got 2 separate drawings on the back, and they don't jive with each other. So we just had some questions, and they didn't show up tonight, so we couldn't answer any of those questions. So I'm going to table that as incomplete. Next one, Special Olympics Polar Plunge. on the 26th of January from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. They've always done a nice job. They've got parking and buses. They've got sanitation taken care of. They got their insurance. Because it's a charity, I move to waive the fee and approve.
Second?
Motion and second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
The last one, Shadowgate condominiums, came in with no drawing whatsoever or measurements, so again, incomplete, and we're going to table that. And that concludes the utilization committee.
Any questions for Mark? All right, thank you, Mark. Lake Education Committee, Scott?
Yeah, we have, we got our website just about ready to, well, I think it is ready. It's up and running. We got photographs on it. I will put in another request to get pictures of the winter events. And we are doing it panorama style, like, 3:1 ratio. And it would be nice to get some pictures of the activities going on. So I will throw that request out. And we did get the updated ordinances posted. I sent out an email on that. I think at some point we should probably just print copies so everyone can have one because we've got a lot of new members. I don't know if everybody got a, 3-hole punch copy of the ordinances. But they certainly look a lot nicer now. So one thing is that we put it into Microsoft Word, which is now will be the master copy. And when Kim comes back, we need to make sure that a copy is kept in the office and with our attorney. So if any more updates are made, we will want to do it in Word and then produce a PDF from that. But right now, it's set up that you can download the PDF, and it is internally linked, so you can click on the table of contents and then jump right down to the ordinance you want to look at.
I'd like to say thank you, Scott, for the effort you put into that, because that is huge, and I know that at times I'm sure it was frustrating. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And that is my report.
Any questions for Scott?
Yeah, you did mention that you were going to look and see if there were any reports, et cetera, from the White Bear Lake Restoration Association case that could be placed on your website, or more information about that case?
About what case?
About the White Bear Lake Restoration
Oh, the
case?
lawsuit?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of that might be, I looked and I thought we put a lot of that in archive, and I didn't see it in the archive, so I'll have to dig around and look at it some more.
Okay.
Alan, can I just piggyback on that question? Are there any websites that you're aware of regarding the lawsuit that we could just have a link on our website for in case people wanted more information?
That would contain the documents from the actual case?
Well, that or just any information.
I think some of the media outlets probably did the best coverage to know where the case was going. It was privately litigated, so because of that, there's not really any public way to track that. This city, because they joined in the lawsuit, might have some nice files that could be gone through and copies made of what they have. But as far as like a connectable link, the easiest thing for anyone to do in the public, and certainly you could put something on the website suggesting that if someone's curious, all of the documents in the case would be available, at the courthouse. So you look up the file and all of the documents, everything that was ever put into the case is going to be indexed by number, starting at number 1 all the way through whatever that master number is. So can you get that digitally? I don't think so, not without going to the courthouse.
Yeah, we certainly have, for the last couple of, 2 or 3 years, all of the media articles on it
Yeah.
should be there, links to them.
And to be clear, the courthouse view for that level of granularity, you cannot get unless you go to the courthouse. So it's not like we could publish a link to the Ramsey County court system and access it from home. So it does mean going downtown and accessing it through one of their data terminals.
But if we wanted to provide information that, to people, to the public that visit our website, we could just put a statement on there somewhere, and Scott, you help me if I misspeak. We could put a statement on there that lawsuit documents are available at the
Ramsey County Courthouse.
Ramsey County Courthouse, and just leave it at that.
And we could just put the caption of the case, so then they would actually have full access, because it's going to have literally a case file number, and so you'd want the caption and/or that filing number, and then just scribble that down or print that page, go down, plug it in, and the whole thing will just come up.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of documents we have had on the website in the past, which should be in the archive, are things like from before the lawsuit. You know, there were some studies that they paid for, lawsuit group paid for. And some of those things are, from 4 years ago.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
So the USGS stuff.
And the question is, how relevant is that stuff? Because a lot of that's historical, and it should be in the archives if anybody wanted to dig it out. But I couldn't find that. But I don't think we've ever had stuff that was introduced in evidence at the courthouse. I don't think that's ever been on our website.
Right. So
Yeah, nothing that we've produced. I believe that the USGS study is one of the exhibits in the actual lawsuit. So, was it introduced by the district? No. So it was used by the litigants, because the USGS, they were some of the principal testimony. Perry Jones, who most people here remember the name of, he was one of the testifiers in the case. So,
Yeah, and we have like the 4 or 5 year old things
Yeah.
from the USGS.
that we commissioned,
They're
basically.
there, yeah, so we've got that stuff.
So maybe, Ellen, could you send Scott just a very,
information.
very brief blurb that would have a reference that you just mentioned, so that Scott could throw that over the fence to our web provider, so that if anybody wants that information, I think it's kind of a slippery slope for us to start putting stuff on, because is it complete, is it not complete, that kind of thing. So my preference would be to point people in the direction where the information actually exists. So if you could just send Scott
Happy to do that, yeah.
a blurb that Scott could put on, and then maybe
We'll have
just
to
call it good.
figure out how to make that fit.
Oh.
We do have like a list of who's who connected with the lake, and that needs to be updated still. So, there's tremendous amount of work that could always be done on the website.
Sure.
But I'm just happy that we got it cleaned up,
Yeah, well, it's a lot better.
so.
Okay, any questions for Scott? All right, thank you, Scott. Treasurer's report, Diane?
Chair and Board, there is the Treasurer's report for November 2018. Where'd mine go? Here it is. I would like to make a motion to accept checks 4532 through 4537.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. It's approved.
Okay, and then, since we don't meet in December, we do a estimated treasurer's report, and then in January, you will get the actual December's 2018 treasurer's report. So I would just like to move to accept this estimated December 2018 treasurer's report.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Mike?
Do you want to add McComas on there?
Yeah, since it's estimated, I just,
But we're proving it,
yeah, well, but this will change anyway,
as long as you're comfortable with it.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the city won't be the same, and there may be other things added to it also, too. So, and since I didn't have his invoice until tonight, I can't really change this, so.
So it's estimated, does that mean you can or can't write any actual checks during December?
No, I can, if you approve
Oh,
an
okay.
estimated, that's why we're doing it.
Right,
yeah,
okay.
So I can write checks, yeah.
So we'll never have to approve certain check numbers for December?
You will in January. I will
Okay,
get,
but they've already been written.
right, but they were
Okay.
approved from an estimated one.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
No, I was just
Yeah.
wondering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just to be clear, the motion that's on the table would pre-approve some estimated expenses. The actual expenses would be realized, the checks would be written in December, and then in January, we would receive the December report so that we could see exactly what was written, the expenses, and then we would approve it or we'd approve it then, the actual checks.
Yes.
Any other questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That passes.
Thank you.
That's it. Any questions for Diane? Okay. Thank you, Diane. Board council report.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Scott, I'll double that. So if there's one thing lawyers don't do well, it's actually do the stuff that Scott did. So between reducing everything to Word and somewhat flowing, now with that extra bit of
As best it
frosting,
can.
I think it looks pretty good. I did take the opportunity, since I talked to the LUC before the actual board met, to see what we could scrape up through the files that are archived with us regarding tallies, because it did come up regarding the DNR permit. And so after going through only a few documents, I did find the protected waters permit that was issued to tallies. It does appear that it was issued back in 1999 by Mr. Hormuth, the regional hydrologist. And that says, and I quote from the face of the permit, "The authorized work is to maintain a 42-slip marina along a 300-foot-long dock, a customer service dock 5 feet wide by 120 feet long, a gas dock 5 feet wide by 25 feet long, and a floating structure 100 feet wide and extending 30 feet from shore, all in accordance with the drawing received August 19th, 1999 as Exhibit A, which they call a marina facility." That doesn't appear on its face to talk about any more than 42 available parking spaces for boats or other watercraft. So unless there's something that's amended that since 806250 has come out in 99, I think that's all the DNR thinks is going into Tally's space. So it could be as simple as Mr. Deinert going back and saying, "Give me a copy of my updated permit." You remember the one where I actually asked for the total number of slips that I have? It could be that there's a previous one that this is actually added to, or it could be that no one at the DNR knew that the remaining 22 or 23 were actually going to stay. So that's kind of the open question, but this is the only permit I found in the whole file. So research continues, and hopefully we can go back and figure this out for next month. The good thing is it's an incomplete application anyway. So I'll continue to do some digging and call the DNR and see what they've got, if they've supplemented this, assuming that that would be helpful,
Yeah.
right?
I think that's good, right, Mark?
So I'll work on that, and other than that, I'd stand for questions. Didn't see any action in court, so I think speed boating is done for the year. So I'll wait for the snowmobile tickets to come in.
And Alan, I have a question. So does every one of the docks in Commercial Bay have a DNR permit like that?
Everyone has a protected waters permit who's in Commercial Bay. So you don't need those things if you're an association dock. It's only if you're a commercial marina operator.
And we haven't approved any Commercial Bay dock requests this season, have we, Mark?
I don't think so. This is the first one, isn't it? Tallies?
And so we will uniformly ask for them to provide a copy of their DNR.
I think it would be a good idea to add that to the at least to the Commercial Bay permits. Granted, it would mean Kim would have to send a separate, application out, or maybe just add a line saying that the DNR permit on file is not changed, or we're not asking anything beyond whatever that number is. So, I didn't think that it would take digging back to 1999 to figure out what the DNR actually said, and, that's 20 years ago, so I'm not sure if this is still current, but it's the only thing that was in the file. So we should definitely get, that's obviously some administrative work that she can do, meaning Kim. I don't think that it's that burdensome, considering we only need, 2 or 3 more of these things? So between the VFW and the city / whatever, whoever's operating that, and then Docks of White Bear, right? That's about it. So you could make the argument that IGO, because he's got a couple, right? Aqua, yeah, whoever that is as an applicant, technically they should have their own protected water permit too, if they're using it as a rental and it's in Commercial Bay.
So who's taking the lead on following up with that? Is that,
That's my responsibility.
And I can work with Kim. I'll certainly take care of this since I've now got one to
I'll be
reference.
calling the DNR over Christmas break.
thanks for your efforts.
I'll work on the tallies one since I got it right here.
Okay.
All right.
Any other questions for Alan? Okay, thank you, Alan. Consent agenda, Diane?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Announcements, Kim's not here, so I would like to make an announcement. I know that we don't like to call it ice-in date because that implies that the ice is safe, but I would appreciate it if people would pay attention and we could come up with an approximate date when the lake is ice-covered, just because that impacts evaporation. And I'd like to, like we did last year, I'd like to keep tracking that. So if you folks that are around the lake a lot could just pay attention to that, and then bring that information, either send that information, actually, if you could send that information to Kim, and then that would be great.
Yep, I did that last year, I'll do it again.
Thank you for that. And then the other announcement is that we don't have a board meeting in December, in case people weren't aware of that. Okay, so we're on to adjournment.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, oh, Alan.
as maybe a point of personal whatever, I think maybe an attaboy to Mr. Barton Winter would be in order. I think this is his last meeting.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because my situation has changed now. My recent communication said they didn't have anybody
Yeah, we did.
yet.
Yeah. Last week in Birchwood.
That's what the Tobin at the, he's the clerk for Birchwood. So I don't know yet. I can't say it might be, but not yet. I'm not certain yet.
Well, I apologize. Last week it was announced at the meeting that
Really?
we're done at, this was your last meeting, so.
The last time? Yeah. Well, things
Never
have
mind.
changed a little bit, and they didn't, I know that they were engaging someone in Birchwood, and, but apparently maybe he's not firm right now, so I don't. So I might be back in January. It's possible.
Well, again, my apologies. The rumors of your death were greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
Well, Barton, if this is your last meeting, thank you for your service to the board.
Yeah.
And if it's not, well, then we look forward to seeing you in January.
Right.
Along those lines, since we're not meeting in December, this will be my last meeting.
Oh.
I was elected to the Delwood City Council, so I will be forced to come off the board.
Yeah, well, you don't get sworn in until the 20th, right? Or is it the 1st?
Well, I'm not sure, but I'll wait
be
to
done.
officially resign until we find a replacement, but.
Congratulations, by the way.
Yep, congratulations on that.
In Delwood.
Okay, so Brady, if it is your last meeting, thank you for your service to the board. And if it's not, then we look forward to seeing you in January. And good luck on the city council. I guess be careful what you ask for, huh? Or what you hope for. Okay, so any other announcements? Okay, so we are officially to item 11, adjournment, and I'll go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. There, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Good job.